All right, I am thrilled to be chatting with Mallory Whitmore. She's a certified infant feeding technician, also known as the Formula Mom on social media. Mallory founded the Formula Mom back in August of 2020. It's an online platform that provides education and support for formula feeding parents. So today we're going to be talking about the growing baby formula shortage that we're seeing around the country, and also get some really practical advice for parents right now who are struggling to find formula and therefore struggling to feed their children. Mallory, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
And I just want to mention that before we start, this is solely a conversation about the formula shortage. This is not a conversation about breastfeeding versus pumping versus formula, which I know can get really emotionally charged. And just to lay out some numbers, about 75% of US families have introduced formula by month 6. So obviously this is a huge issue.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mallory, so can you just give us here a state of play right now? Because the latest data shows that about 40% of popular baby formula brands are actually sold out around the country at stores. Obviously, certain areas are worse than others. So Texas, for example, New Jersey, specifically being hit hard right now. We've got retailers that are actually limiting the amount of formula that parents and caregivers can buy. I'm curious, you have built such a huge community of new parents. What are you seeing and hearing from them right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of stress, a lot of panic. And, as a parent, it's stressful enough trying to figure out how to exist with a newborn, how to feed your baby without the added stress of being unsure if you can find the food that you use for them. There's a lot of concern and also a lot of building outrage that we're not seeing more media coverage, that we're not talking about solutions for this problem. How is it that 40%, almost half of the stock of what we feed our most vulnerable Americans, how is it that that's just missing and no one's talking about it? There's a lot of concern, and there's a lot of concern about whether it's going to get worse.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be getting into that. I just want to start though with how we got here. Why are we right now dealing with such a shortage of baby formula?
Yeah, there's really been a variety of events that have all led to this point, this moment that we're seeing now. So late 2021 started to see some minor shortages, maybe 10 to 15% out of stock, which is still greater. Typically, we're looking at 95% or above in stock. So late 2021, we started to see a slight decrease, and that was related to the Omicron variant, the end of the Delta variant, and just the supply chain issues that we've been seeing across different markets related to quarantining and a labor shortage. So we already had that in play. And then in February 2022, we had a very large recall, the largest formula recall in memory, largest in decades, where Abbott, which is one of the largest formula manufacturers globally, pulled a huge portion of their stock off the shelves in a voluntary recall. And that was just a hit on top of an already existing problem. And as a result of that, a huge portion of the formula was just immediately removed from the shelves. And for good reason. They had reason to do this recall, but the combination of the existing supply chain troubles that we were facing and the recall, and now the continued labor shortages that we're seeing, the continued increase in pricing due to inflation that's making some ingredients more difficult to source. All of these things put together have left us at this moment where the formula is just really getting hard to find.
From my understanding, that plant as well in Michigan that issued the voluntary recall, not only do they make some of the most popular brands like Similac, but they also make the real specialty formula as well, right?
They do. So they make hypoallergenic formula and amino acid formula. And amino acid formulas are very important for infants and children, and even some adults that are medically fragile, that have metabolic disorders, that have very significant food allergies and other digestive complications where they're unable to tolerate food by mouth or standard cow milk based formulas. And so we're seeing a really serious concern for some of those very most vulnerable people that rely, especially on formula for tube feeding, that really don't have other options. It's not an option for them to go to the grocery store and just pick up something else due to their more significant needs. There's really a lot of concern in that community right now.
And one of the biggest questions that we've been getting is there a light at the end of the tunnel? When do you think that we might see things starting to pick back up again?
Truly, it's hard to say. At this point, that very large manufacturing facility in Sturgis, Michigan, has been closed for 3 months. We do not have a tentative date for when the FDA may authorize them to resume production. We do know that the formula manufacturing cycle takes about 8 weeks. So even if they would start today, we wouldn't see an increase in product on the shelves for another 2 months. And we don't know that they're going to start today. All indications is that they will remain closed for a while longer. So I know that other manufacturers are trying to pick up the pace in order to fill some of the need, but there are just capacity limitations across the board.
Is there anything that the government is doing or should be doing? Because during the height of the pandemic, I remember the Defense Production Act, the government got involved in making ventilators. Is there anything that the government can do to just encourage these companies to ramp up production?
That's a great question. We have not seen a lot of movement from the government to address this issue. The biggest thing that has been helpful is that they authorized WIC, the Women's Infant Children Supplementary Assistance Program, to allow families that use WIC to purchase alternate products. So, for example, in the state of Tennessee, where I'm from, Similac is the only authorized WIC provider. And so obviously Similac is not available right now. And so the US government has allowed different states to reimburse for different products. So that has been helpful, but we haven't seen a lot of movement in encouraging the FDA to do a faster investigation. We have not seen any movement in providing resources for these other manufacturers to increase their supply. And that's been causing a lot of frustration for parents.
So Mallory, I've spent a lot of time on your Instagram account, partly for research purposes to prep for this interview, but also because I myself am pregnant. I'm 7 months pregnant right now, and I'm going to be dealing with this issue like so many other parents. You have 4 strategies that you laid out for parents who are struggling to find their preferred formula. Can you walk us through them?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I always encourage parents to talk to their child's pediatrician. If you have concerns about what you're feeding your baby, about their nutrition, sometimes infants may have specific needs if they have allergies or if they're premature. So always talk to your pediatrician first. After that, your biggest strategy is going to be looking at the ingredients on the back of the formula that you have been using, really paying attention to the protein type and the carbohydrate source that's in your baby's formula, and trying to find a formula that's similar. After that, there are a couple of options that you can do to sort of flex and wiggle if you can't find something similar. Number one, look for a store brand alternative. Store brand formulas are safe, they're highly regulated, they meet all the same FDA requirements as name brand, and they tend to be more available. A lot of parents don't know that the store brand formulas are all manufactured by the same company, which means that the recipes are the same store to store. So your Target Up and Up Gentle formula is the same as your Walmart Parents' Choice Gentle formula. And that really expands the pool of stores that you can look at for your specific formula. So look at store brand options. You might want to consider changing the type of formula from powder to ready to feed or ready to feed to concentrate formula if you're unable to find the kind that you're typically using. And then after that, look at family and friends, see if anybody has samples. Again, talk to your pediatrician. They often have samples. Talk to your family and friends that are out of state, see if they could provide any formula for you that way. And just, it's a lot of networking right now, a lot of networking.
On that note, I know that you created this formula exchange board. Can you tell us a bit how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. I, like so many other parents, have felt sort of helpless in terms of how to make this better for families. I don't have an infant anymore. My youngest is almost 3. And so I felt the need and wanted to do something to help. And I do have a large platform. So I created this formula exchange board, which has lists according to brand and type of formula where parents can post either their need or what formula they have access to and connect with other parents so that they can ship or deliver, drop off, depending on location, formula to folks that are in need.
It's one of the biggest questions that we've been getting is actually from parents, or not even parents, from people who don't necessarily have kids and who are on formula right now, but wanting to help. Is there anything that they can do?
Yeah, I would encourage folks, pay attention to your neighborhood community boards, your next door app. If there's a mom's group for your city or town, for your community, if there are places where young parents tend to hang out, either in person or online, check in, because everybody's talking about this within the young parent community. And so you're going to be able to quickly see what the needs are in your local community and see if you have access to help.
I wonder why do you think it is that the government isn't more on top of this? There are maybe a handful of members of Congress who are young parents themselves who are now sort of sounding the alarm. But the HuffPost just came out with a piece that were saying a lot of Congress members hadn't even heard that there was a shortage. Why do you think that is? And do you think that the parent community needs to just be louder about this?
Yeah, like I mentioned, there's a lot of concern and a lot of outrage building about parents feeling like they aren't being heard, that no one is recognizing how big of a problem this is. I think there's also a sense of exhaustion in the parent community of, why do we have to be the ones to bring this, to make a big enough stink that people will notice? Because, obviously parents are tired, especially over the last 2 years. I think the intersection of this situation with what we've seen with the COVID pandemic can't be overstated, especially with regard to the recall. We know the FDA has been absolutely bogged down with drug approvals, with testing approvals. We know that they stopped their inspections of these infant formula facilities in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. And so I think a lot of what we need to see is just a reevaluating of priorities now that we're hopefully, knock on wood, entering a more stable period in the pandemic, to how do we go back and make sure that these other priorities are addressed appropriately.
It's such a good point. And it certainly was not lost on me as a parent of a young daughter and now also pregnant.
Yeah.
The last couple of years has just been so incredibly difficult in general, collectively for everybody. But for young parents, I think parents, excuse me, of young kids, I think have been hit particularly hard.
Yeah.
What are you hearing in terms of the stress factor, the emotional toll that this is taking on parents right now?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult. There is a lot of guilt and shame among parents who feel like the decision to formula feed, whether they felt like it was a choice or not, was the wrong decision. And of course, that's not something that you can walk back easily, especially, if you have an older infant. So there's that, in addition to just the time associated with trying to source your formula, driving to 3 different stores. We've got parents that are driving out of state trying to find their formula. And so it's just adding a huge layer of stress and expense, with increased gas prices for some of these families, with inflation and the cost of formula itself. It's really impacting many areas of these parents' lives.
All right, I want to get to some of our reader questions because we got a lot of really, really good questions. Okay, so a lot of people who are pregnant right now wrote in asking, should they be stocking up on formula at this point? And if not stocking up and just say they've made the decision to do formula, do you recommend they rethink that and maybe decide, maybe give breastfeeding a try or pumping a try?
Yeah, That's a great question. So for the first point, no, I do not recommend stocking up for two reasons. Number one, we know that hoarding increases pressure on the supply and makes it more difficult for families that need formula now. Number two, it can be really difficult when you're pregnant to know what sort of formula your baby will tolerate. And I don't want to risk that parents end up with a huge supply of formula that they spent a lot of money on that their baby won't drink. So I recommend having a week's worth, maybe two max, if you're expecting. And then that'll give you enough time as well to see what your baby will tolerate. You can go from there. So that's to
Um,
the first part of your question.
okay. And then in terms of just this idea of, you mentioned the guilt. I went through it myself. It's
Yeah.
very real, unfortunately, in terms of
Mhm.
formula feeding versus breastfeeding. If somebody's on the fence,
Yeah.
do you think maybe this is something that would encourage them to try breastfeeding or pumping?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I have two kids. I have said if we have another, I will never attempt to breastfeed again because I just know that it didn't work for me. However, if I was expecting right now, I would likely rethink about that decision. And ultimately, what I'm encouraging my parents and my followers to do is to really pay attention to their mental health and really assess which option they think is going to be less stressful. I have always said breastfeeding is stressful. For me, it's not something that I want to do. However, even though it's stressful, for me, it might be less stressful than the concern about whether I'm going to be able to find my baby's formula. So I'm really encouraging folks to think through the pros and cons of where their stress meter might tip
Right.
in that situation. And it's definitely worth considering if it's a possibility for you, if it aligns with your family's needs, with whatever you're doing for work and maternity leave and everything else. If it's workable, I think it's worth considering.
We also got a lot of questions about European formula, like HIP or
Mhm.
Holly. Do you
Yeah.
think that's going to be impacted as well? And what do you think about European formula in general? The FDA has pretty tight regulations around it. Do you think it's possible that this shortage might have them rethink that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Generally speaking, I think European formulas are a great option. I know that they're really life-saving for some families. The challenges that we see with European formulas, especially right now, are related to that supply chain. So one of the biggest risks of using European formula is that you just don't know the safety during transport and storage. So you don't know the temperature, you don't know how the formula is stored while it's being shipped. You don't know how long it's going to sit at customs and under what conditions. And so that continues to be a risk, especially as the supply chain continues to be slow as we're getting things in. In fall 2021, the FDA had a very large crackdown on the import of European formulas. They were destroying a lot of shipments at the border and customs. And so you also run the risk that you just don't get what you paid for. And so that is a concern. But given the shortages that we're seeing domestically, a lot of parents are starting to weigh that risk differently of, maybe this isn't going to work out, but also I don't know that I can go to the grocery store and find it anyway. So,
Right.
where's the risk there? I do think there's also sort of a shifting tide among some parents of can I trust the FDA based on what they saw with the recall, based on what they perceived to be the FDA's slow movement on the recall. It was 4 months from when they got the first report of infant illness before the recall happened. And so there are some parents that are saying, okay, the FDA doesn't approve of European formula. I'm not sure I care at this point.
Right.
And so I do think that we will see an increase in importing until things are resolved domestically.
We got a question as well about Israeli formula, which apparently can't be imported, but is maybe in some kosher supermarkets already.
Mhm.
Any insight there?
Yeah, if you can buy it domestically, I think that's totally fine. If you're going to import it, just be aware again of those same challenges about trying to get it in quickly, paying for expedited shipping if you can, making sure that your boxes aren't damaged in transit, that they're not dented or ripped, and just making sure that you understand the directions, especially if they're not printed in English, the mixing directions.
Another question, is it safe to make your own formula?
No. And we're seeing a very large increase in the amount of chatter on Instagram and other places on the internet about making your own formula. And I absolutely understand the desire behind it. It feels like a way parents can take back control, but it is not recommended. It's very, very difficult to create a product at home that meets the very specific nutrient needs of infants. And you also have the bacterial contamination concern of making a product in an unsterile kitchen. And so we do not recommend homemade formula in any circumstance. If you feel like you are in an absolutely dire situation, I encourage you to talk to your pediatrician or a pediatric dietitian about what you can come up with for your infant.
Are there any other alternatives to feeding? Someone asked, any other alternatives to feeding their baby if they can't find formula?
Some toddler formulas are nutritionally appropriate for infants. Check the nutrient facts on the back. Some of them do meet the FDA nutrient requirements for infants. Cabrita and Babies Only are two brands that I know off the top of my head that are marketed for toddlers but are appropriate for infants. Some infants over the age of 10 months may be able to transition to whole milk or a milk alternative. Always talk to your pediatrician before you do that. So there are those other options there, especially as your infant is getting older and approaching 1 year and eating more solids.
A parent of a 7-month-old asks, and I think this is a question a lot of parents probably have right now, if she can't find her brand, is it okay to switch to a different brand and then switch back?
Yeah, it's typically fine as long as the baby tolerates it. So as long as, you've tried the second brand, you're not seeing any increase in digestive symptoms, rash, mucus in the stool, anything like that, that would indicate a problem. If your baby tolerates it, you can absolutely alternate. You can even combine in the same bottle with two different brands.
Another person asked, they say they give their baby Similac. Is there something similar to Similac? I know that's one of the most popular brands.
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend this parent look at those store brand alternatives. A lot of the store brand alternatives are very similar in composition to Similac. Costco and Sam's Club, their Kirkland and Members Mark brands respectively are very similar if they have access to that.
We've been hearing at Mo News, a lot of Targets have really a big shortage right now. Are there any retailers that are doing better with the formula and are kind of doing worse with formula right now?
Yeah. Generally speaking, pharmacies seem to be doing a little bit better than grocery stores,
Like a
especially.
CVS or a Walgreens, you mean?
Yes, and even specialty and sort of hometown family-owned pharmacies, a lot of them have the ability to order formula. So you can talk to your local pharmacist, see if they can order you some. Amazon tends to have a pretty good stock. I know when I spoke with Similac several weeks ago that they were prioritizing shipments to Amazon just because of Amazon's ability to get it everywhere versus, individual chains.
And a lot of people asking, is it safe for them to ship formula? So if just say someone's in New York, they found formula in the store, they need to send it to family in Tennessee, is that safe?
It is with a couple caveats, as long as you package the formula well so that you're going to reduce the risk that it's going to be damaged in transit. We don't want the formula to be dented or torn or have any visible damage. So package it well, and then make sure that you're paying for expedited shipping so that it's not sitting in a hot truck for, 5 days to a week. So if you're doing overnight or priority and you're packaging it well, and the recipient is getting it off their porch and into, a temperature controlled location, yes, it can be safe.
And just my last question, I know I asked this already, but again, the light at the end of the tunnel, do you think it's going to get much worse, or do you just think it's not going to get better right away?
Yeah, I hope that it's not going to get worse. It would be, I think we would have to see another sort of unprecedented event in order for it to get worse, although we're kind of accumulating those unprecedented events right now.
I think we're there.
We're at the end of the road. I don't think it's going to get worse. I do think it's going to get better, as we know that these other manufacturers are increasing their capacity. And so we should, in a couple of weeks, see the results of them increasing the capacity now.
All right, Mallory, I hope that you're right. And if anybody wants any more information, I really recommend your social media accounts at the Formula Mom on Instagram. Thank you so much for just all of this information. Really, really helpful. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.